Sweat soaked through the collar of my cheap dress shirt. I'd spent $600 on a plane ticket and maxed out a credit card to watch my son graduate. Instead, I sat in a humid gymnasium, listening to the boy I raised publicly erase me. So, I left. I never went back. Stale floor wax, synthetic fabric, the metallic tang of anxiety pooling under my tongue. High school gymnasiums all smell exactly the same, suspended in a permanent state of nervous adolescence. I sat in the upper tier of the bleachers, my knees jammed against the rigid plastic of the seat in front of me. The air conditioning had surrendered hours ago, defeated by the collective body heat of 2,000 parents, grandparents, and restless siblings crammed into the arena. I rubbed my thumb over the cracked screen of my phone, opening and closing the camera app. My hands were rough, the knuckles permanently stained with axle grease, and a lattice of tiny, white scars from slipped wrenches. I'd scrubbed them with pumice soap for 20 minutes that morning in the motel sink, but some dirt just becomes part of your skin. 3 rows down and 50 feet to my left sat Taylor, my ex-wife. She was wearing a tailored linen dress that probably cost more than my first car, her hair blown out into loose, expensive waves. Next to her was Martin. Martin didn't have grease under his nails. Martin had the kind of hands that typed emails, signed checks, and steered a spotless imported SUV. He wore a lightweight slate blue blazer that breathed perfectly in the sweltering gym, looking completely unbothered by the humidity. He leaned over, whispering something into Taylor's ear, and she let out a bright, bell-like laugh. The sound cut through the low roar of the crowd, sharp and familiar. It was the same laugh she used to give me 15 years ago, when we were eating boxed macaroni on the floor of a rented duplex. I looked away, focusing instead on the sea of folding chairs arranged on the basketball court. The graduates were a restless ocean of royal blue gowns. I was scanning for row M, seat 14. That was the last piece of information Leo had texted me 3 weeks ago. Graduation is the 18th, 2 p.m. Gym. I'm in row M, seat 14. Hope you can make it. No love, Leo. No exclamation points. Just the data. I'd replied immediately. Wouldn't miss it for the world, buddy. So proud of you. Flight is booked. He had left me on read. That was how it had been for the last 4 years. The erosion of a father-son relationship isn't usually an explosion. It's not a sudden, violent severing. It's coastal erosion. It's a slow, agonizing wash of missed phone calls, unreturned texts, and scheduling conflicts. It's the transition from, "Dad, watch this," to, "I'm kinda busy this weekend. Can we skip the visit?" When Taylor left me, I didn't fight the divorce, but I fought like a cornered dog for custody. I drained my savings. I took a second job at a distribution warehouse, working the graveyard shift just to afford a lawyer who smelled like stale cigarettes and cheap bourbon. I won every other weekend and alternating holidays. I built my entire life around those weekends. I bought a cramped apartment near the highway because it had a second bedroom. I painted it blue. I bought the bunk beds. But as Leo grew, the contrast between my life and Martin's life became an impossible chasm. Martin entered the picture when Leo was 10. Martin had a boat. Martin had a cabin on the lake. Martin could afford the travel baseball team, the private pitching coaches, the $300 bats. I couldn't. I showed up to the games in my work boots, leaning against the chain-link fence, watching Martin sit in the bleachers with the other affluent parents, buying sports drinks for the whole dugout. I tried. God, I tried. I took Leo fishing at the muddy municipal reservoir. We fixed up an old junker bicycle together. But how do you compete with a man who can just point at a shiny new mountain bike in a showroom window and hand over a piece of plastic? You don't. You just watch the kid you made slowly pivot his center of gravity toward the warmth of an easier life. The high school band, horribly out of tune, began to play Pomp and Circumstance. The low brass groaned like a dying animal. The crowd stood up, a massive wave of rustling fabric and clicking cameras. I stood too. My bad knee popped, a souvenir from a fall off a loading dock 6 years ago. I ignored the dull throb and raised my phone. The graduates began filing in. I scanned the faces, acne-scarred cheeks, braces, nervous smiles. And then, there he was. Leo. He had shot up another 2 inches since I last saw him at Christmas. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the royal blue gown hanging off his athletic frame. His jawline was sharp, a carbon copy of my father's. He looked so grown. My chest tightened, a vice gripping my ribs. A sudden, embarrassing pressure pricked behind my eyes. I blinked it away quickly, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted iron. I hit record on my phone. He didn't look up at the bleachers. He kept his eyes straight ahead, a calm, confident smirk on his face. He walked past my section, past Taylor and Martin's section, and took his seat in row M. I sat back down as the music faded out. The principal approached the podium, tapping the microphone. A sharp screech of feedback echoed through the rafters, making half the gym wince. I kept my eyes locked on the back of Leo's head. "I'm here, kid," I thought. A desperate, silent broadcast. I flew across the country. I ate ramen for a month to afford the ticket. "I'm here." I wanted him to turn around. Just once. Just to scan the crowd, find my face, and give me that tight, barely there nod that men give each other when they don't know how to express love. But he didn't turn. He just sat there, a blue island in a sea of identical blue islands, staring straight ahead at the podium. The ceremony was a blur of platitudes. The principal talked about unprecedented times and stepping into the future. The superintendent mumbled something about eagles taking flight. The gymnasium grew hotter, the air thick and stifling. The guy sitting next to me was breathing heavily through his mouth, smelling of peppermint antacids and sweat. I wiped my forehead with the back of my wrist, keeping my phone angled toward the stage. Finally, the principal adjusted his glasses. And now, to deliver our valedictory address, a young man who embodies the spirit of our school. He has excelled on the baseball field, in the classroom, and in our community. Please welcome Leo. He said my last name. It echoed in the speakers. A sharp, distinct two-syllable anchor that tied that boy on the stage to the grease-stained man in the cheap seats. The gym erupted. The baseball team seated in the front rows started barking and cheering. Taylor leaped to her feet, clapping wildly. Martin stood beside her, smiling that perfectly even, expensive smile, patting her lower back. I stood too. My hand shook slightly as I zoomed in on Leo. He walked up the wooden stairs to the stage, his gown billowing slightly. He looked completely at ease. He adjusted the microphone stand, pulling it down to his height. He tapped the mic, smiled, and looked out over the crowd. "Wow," Leo said. His voice was deeper than I remembered. It boomed through the speakers, confident and steady. "Look at us. We actually made it." Laughter rippled through the audience. I zoomed in closer. I could see the sweat on his forehead under the harsh stage lights. "They tell you that high school is the best 4 years of your life," Leo continued, looking at his notes. "I think that's a terrifying thought, because if this is the peak, it's all downhill from here. And I don't know about you guys, but I have terrible balance." More laughter. He was good. He had timing. He didn't get that from me. I couldn't tell a joke to save my life. He got that charm from his mother. He talked about the late night studying, the terrible cafeteria food, the canceled games, the teachers who actually cared. He spoke for about 5 minutes, holding the room in the palm of his hand. I felt an overwhelming, crushing wave of pride. That was my boy. I taught him how to read. I sat on the carpet of my crappy apartment and sounded out the words in "Where the Wild Things Are" until my throat was hoarse. I held the back of his bicycle seat. I patched his scraped knees. "None of us get here alone," Leo said, his tone shifting. The jokes faded. He leaned closer to the microphone, his expression turning serious. The gym went dead silent. You could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. "We stand on the shoulders of the people who believed in us, the people who showed up." My chest swelled. I stopped breathing. I kept the camera steady. Here it comes, I thought. The acknowledgement. The olive branch. "Mom," Leo said, looking directly at the section where Taylor was sitting. "You are my rock. You worked so hard to give me the life I have. You never let me settle for less than my best. I love you." Taylor covered her mouth with her hand, her shoulders shaking. The crowd offered a collective, warm murmur. Leo paused. He took a breath. He looked at the notes on the podium, then looked back up, his eyes locking onto the exact same section. "And I want to talk about what it means to be a man," Leo said. His voice dropped an octave. It was slow, deliberate. A lot of guys grow up without a compass, without someone to show them the ropes. I was lucky. I gripped the phone tighter. The plastic case dug into my palm. I didn't just have a mother who loved me. I had a man who stepped in when he didn't have to. The air in my lungs turned to ash. "Martin," Leo said. The name rang through the speakers. It bounced off the polished wood of the basketball court. It hit me in the chest like a physical blow, heavy and blunt. "You didn't just give me a roof over my head," Leo continued, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a standard to live by. You taught me how to drive. You taught me how to tie a Windsor knot before prom. You taught me how to throw a curveball. But more importantly, you taught me what loyalty looks like. You taught me that being a father isn't about biology. It's about presence. It's about who shows up." The gym was so quiet I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. A high-pitched whining ring started in my head. The edges of my vision blurred, the bright blue of his gown smearing into a static haze. "You taught me how to drive." I remembered sitting in the passenger seat of my beat-up Ford, letting a 12-year-old Leo steer around an empty mall parking lot, his face glowing with terrified joy. "You taught me how to throw a curveball." I remembered spending $200 I didn't have on a pitching net, setting it up in the alleyway behind my apartment, catching for him until my palm was bruised purple because we couldn't afford a catcher's mitt. It's about who shows up. I looked down at my grease-stained hands. I looked at the frayed cuffs of my cheap shirt. I looked at the $600 plane ticket confirmation still folded in my breast pocket. I showed up. I showed up to the empty apartment. I showed up to the second job. I showed up to the child support hearings to watch a judge siphon away my ability to compete with a man who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. "You are my hero, Martin," Leo said. His voice cracked. "And I am so proud to be your son." The crowd erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a standing ovation. People love a savior story. They love the narrative of the noble stepdad rescuing the poor, fatherless boy. Down below, Martin stood up. He was crying. He walked to the edge of the seating section, and Leo leaned down from the stage. They embraced, a tight, masculine hug. Taylor was sobbing, clapping her hands together. The people sitting around them were patting Martin on the back. I sat completely still. My phone was still recording. On the screen, I watched my son hug another man and call him father. There was no anger. Not at first. Anger is hot. Anger makes you want to shout, to throw something, to cause a scene. What I felt was entirely different. It was cold. It was the absolute, sub-zero temperature of deep space. It was the sudden, undeniable realization of death. The father-son relationship hadn't eroded. It wasn't eroding anymore. It was gone. The boy on that stage was Martin's son. He had Martin's values, Martin's perspective, Martin's truth. In Leo's reality, I was just a biological footnote. A ghost who occasionally sent awkward text messages. He had rewritten his own history, and in that history, I was the villain who left, and Martin was the hero who stayed. He didn't know about the double shifts. He didn't know about the lawyer fees. He only knew that Martin's house had a pool, and my apartment smelled like cabbage and pine sol. And he had made his choice. I lowered my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen. I pressed the small red square to stop recording. Then, without thinking, without hesitating, I pressed delete. The applause was still rolling through the gymnasium. Leo was walking back to his seat, wiping his eyes, high-fiving the kids in the front row. The principal returned to the podium, waiting for the crowd to settle down. "What a beautiful tribute," the principal murmured into the mic, his voice thick with fake, performative emotion. "Thank you, Leo." I put my phone in my pocket. I looked at the man sitting next to me. He was wiping a tear from his eye. He looked at me, giving me a small, tight-lipped smile of shared humanity, completely unaware that I was the deadbeat ghost who had just been publicly executed. I didn't smile back. I stood up. The folding plastic seat snapped back into place with a sharp clack that sounded like a gunshot in my own ears, though it was lost in the vast noise of the room. I stepped over the legs of the man next to me. "Excuse me," I muttered. My voice sounded hollow. I walked down the bleacher stairs. I didn't rush. I didn't run. I moved with the slow, deliberate, mechanical precision of a man walking to the gallows. My heavy work boots thumped against the wooden planks. Thump, thump, thump. I kept my eyes fixed on the exit doors at the far end of the gym. I didn't look at the stage. I didn't look at row M. I certainly didn't look at the expensive seats where Taylor and Martin were sitting. I just walked. A few heads turned as I reached the bottom of the bleachers and walked along the perimeter of the basketball court. A balding man in a yellow polo shirt frowned at me, annoyed that I was moving during the ceremony. I walked right past him. The air grew marginally cooler as I approached the lobby. The double doors separating the gym from the foyer were heavy, reinforced steel with brass crash bars. I pressed my hands against the cool metal. For a fraction of a second, my momentum stopped. Behind me, the principal was calling the first row of graduates to the stage. Adams, Benjamin, Alvarez, Maria. All I had to do was turn around. All I had to do was stand in the back, watch him get his diploma, wait for the ceremony to end, and endure the agonizing reception in the cafeteria. I could walk up to him, hand him the card with the $200 to $100 cash inside money that had taken me 3 months to save, shake his hand, and say, "Congratulations." I could swallow the bile. I could eat the humiliation. That's what fathers do, right? They eat the pain. My hand tightened on the brass bar. "You taught me what a real man is." The echo of his voice vibrated in my skull. I wasn't his father anymore. I was just a biological donor crashing another family's party. I pushed the bar. The heavy door swung open, silencing the voice of the principal. The high school lobby was empty, smelling faintly of bleach and old trophy brass. The silence out here was deafening. I walked across the linoleum floor, my boots squeaking slightly. I pushed through the exterior glass doors and stepped out into the blinding mid-afternoon sun. The heat hit me like a physical wall. It was 92 degrees, the asphalt of the massive parking lot shimmering with a mirage-like haze. The lot was completely full, rows upon rows of baking metal. I walked toward my rental car, a cheap, compact sedan parked way in the back near the dumpsters. The walk took forever. The sun beat down on my neck, soaking the collar of my shirt even further. My tie felt like a noose. I reached up and pulled it loose, yanking it over my head without unknotting it. I threw it on the asphalt. When I reached the car, I leaned against the trunk for a moment. My chest was heaving, though I hadn't run a single step. I felt a strange, terrifying hollowness expanding inside my ribcage. It was the feeling you get when you drop a glass, and in the split second before it hits the floor, you know you can't catch it. It's already broken. You're just waiting for the sound. The sound never came. Just the low hum of distant highway traffic. I pulled my keys out of my pocket. They jingled sharply in the quiet lot. I unlocked the door, the car beeping twice. The interior of the sedan was an oven. I didn't care. I got in, slammed the door, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered to life. The cheap AC, blowing hot, stale air directly into my face. I put the car in reverse. I didn't look at the high school building. I backed out, shifted into drive, and rolled toward the exit. As I pulled out onto the main road, the massive brick facade of the school disappeared behind a row of oak trees in the rearview mirror. I drove toward the highway, heading for the airport. My flight wasn't until tomorrow morning. I didn't care. I would sleep on the floor of the terminal. I just needed to be out of this zip code. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I unlocked it. The home screen was a picture of me and Leo from 6 years ago, standing on a dock, holding up a tiny, miserable-looking bluegill we'd caught. He was missing a front tooth, smiling so hard his eyes were squinted shut. I stared at the screen for a long time as I waited at a red light. Then, I opened my settings. I went to the wallpaper. I changed it to the default black screen. I navigated to my contacts. I scrolled down to Leo. My thumb hovered over the screen. The light turned green. The guy behind me honked his horn. I hit block caller. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, stepped on the gas, and drove toward the highway, leaving the ghost of my son behind in the heat. Fluorescent lights hummed with a sickly, vibrating frequency inside Concourse B. I sat on a cracked vinyl stool at an overpriced airport bar, watching a muted television screen display a weather map I didn't care about. My flight wasn't scheduled to board for another 14 hours. The bartender, a guy in his late 20s with tired eyes and a stained apron, placed a glass of domestic draft on a cardboard coaster in front of me. The condensation immediately began to pool at the base. I traced the rim of the wet glass with my thumb. My knuckles still looked raw. I took a drink. It tasted like copper and cold aluminum, but it numbed the back of my throat. That was all I required of it. My phone, resting face down on the sticky mahogany surface, vibrated. The sound was a dull, angry buzz against the wood. It stopped. Then, 10 seconds later, it started again. It vibrated so hard it rotated a quarter inch to the right. I didn't touch it. I took another slow drag of the beer. It buzzed a third time. I picked it up and flipped it over. The screen glared back at me, bright and demanding. Taylor. She was calling. I watched her name flash, illuminating the smudges on my screen. I let it ring until the voicemail caught it. Immediately, a text bubble appeared, then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. I tapped the screen to open them, my face entirely devoid of expression. Where are you? The ceremony is over. We're in the courtyard taking pictures. Leo is asking if you made it out of the gym. We have reservations at the steakhouse downtown. Table for 8. Are you coming or not? Don't do this today. Just show up and be an adult. I read the words 3 times. A harsh, jagged laugh scraped its way out of my throat, loud enough that the businessman sitting 2 stools down shot me a sideways glance. I ignored him. Leo is asking if you made it out of the gym. Not Leo wants you here. Not Leo is looking for his father. Just a casual inventory check. Did the biological donor manage to navigate the exit doors? Did he stick around to witness the coronation of the new king? And the steakhouse. I knew the steakhouse Taylor was talking about. It was the kind of place where the waiters scrape the crumbs off your table with a little metal blade between courses. It was Martin's favorite place. Martin was paying. Of course he was. I pictured the massive circular booth. Martin at the head, Leo to his right, Taylor to his left, the grandparents. And then, at the far end of the table, near the swinging kitchen doors, an empty chair reserved for me. The graceful loser, the defeated understudy brought in to clap for the leading man and pretend the script wasn't breaking his jaw. They didn't want me there because they loved me. They wanted me there to complete the aesthetic, the modern, blended, evolved family. They needed me to sit there, chew a $50 steak I couldn't afford, and validate their narrative. They needed the ghost to smile and bless the exorcism. My thumbs hovered over the glass keyboard. I could write a paragraph. I could scream through the digital ether. I could tell her exactly what her son had done to me, exactly how that microphone had felt like a firing squad. I could demand an apology. Instead, I typed nothing. I clicked on her contact profile. I scrolled down past her phone number, past her email address, past the linked calendar we hadn't used in 5 years. Block caller. A prompt popped up asking if I was sure. I pressed yes. I backed out of the menu, pulled up my banking app, and checked my balance. $312 to my name. I slid a 20 across the bar, leaving a generous tip for the tired kid in the apron, and walked away. I spent the night curled on the carpet near gate 42. The floor was hard, covered in a thin industrial weave that smelled of spilled coffee and old dust. The air conditioning was cranked down to an aggressive, freezing temperature to keep the homeless out of the terminal. I used my thin jacket as a blanket, shivering against the wall. Listening to the automated voice over the intercom announce baggage restrictions to a completely empty concourse. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bright royal blue of that graduation gown. I heard the crack in his voice. "You are my hero, Martin." I let the pain wash over me. I didn't fight it. I didn't try to intellectualize it or push it away. I just lay there on the filthy carpet and let it break whatever was left inside my chest to break. I grieved the boy. I grieved the little kid sitting on the floor of my duplex, eating generic macaroni, asking me why the sky was blue. I grieved the teenager who threw a baseball into my bruised palm. By the time the sun came up, painting the massive airport windows in bruised shades of purple and gray, the grieving was done. The fire had burned itself entirely out, leaving nothing but cold, hardened charcoal. I stood up. My knee popped. My back ached with a dull, heavy throb. I went to the men's room, washed my face with abrasive pink industrial soap, and looked at myself in the mirror. The bags under my eyes were dark, heavy pouches. Gray hair peppered my temples. I looked old. I looked like a man who had spent 15 years pushing a boulder up a hill, only to finally let it roll back down and crush him. But as I dried my face with a rough paper towel, I realized something else. My shoulders were light. The invisible harness I had worn for a decade, the agonizing pressure to compete, to scrape together pennies for a weekend visit, to force a connection with a teenager who viewed me as a chore. It was gone. The tether had been cut. Leo had severed it on that stage. I threw the paper towel into the trash can. I walked to my gate. I boarded the plane. I took a window seat, leaned my head against the cold plexiglass, and as the plane tore upward through the clouds, leaving that city behind, I didn't look down. October arrived with a brutal, biting wind that stripped the trees bare around my apartment complex. The warehouse was freezing in the mornings. I was working the forklift, moving pallets of frozen goods from the loading bays to the cold storage lockers. The physical labor was a blessing. It demanded my complete attention. If you zone out with 3 tons of steel moving at 5 miles an hour, you lose a limb or kill a coworker. The constant, grinding focus required by the machinery left no room in my brain for memories. 5 months had passed since the gymnasium. I hadn't spoken a single word to my ex-wife or my son. At first, the silence had been loud. In the weeks immediately following the graduation, my brain kept anticipating the vibration of a text message. I would walk past the sporting goods aisle in the grocery store and feel a phantom twitch in my wallet, a hardwired instinct to buy a pack of batting gloves. But slowly, the programming began to fade. The silence stopped being a void and started becoming a foundation. I pulled my truck into my assigned parking space, the engine ticking as it cooled off in the evening air. I grabbed my thermos, locked the doors, and walked up the 3 flights of concrete stairs to my apartment. The place smelled of roasted garlic and cheap coffee. I unlocked the deadbolt and stepped inside. It was small, cramped, and entirely mine. I walked past the kitchen and stopped in the hallway, looking through the open door of the second bedroom. The room was no longer blue. 2 months ago, I had gone to the hardware store and bought 3 gallons of a neutral, industrial gray paint. I had spent an entire weekend rolling it over the pale blue walls I had painted a decade earlier. I had dismantled the wooden bunk beds, carrying the heavy pieces down 3 flights of stairs by myself. I sold them to a guy on Craigslist for $50. He drove a beat-up minivan and looked exhausted, thanking me profusely because he was moving his twin boys into a new apartment. I helped him load the frame, shook his hand, and watched him drive away with the physical architecture of my fatherhood strapped to his roof. Now, the room was a home gym and a workspace. I had bought a second-hand weight bench and a heavy bag. I had set up a sturdy wooden desk where I could tinker with broken alternators and small engines for extra cash. It didn't look like a boy's room anymore. It looked like the room of a bachelor. I walked into the kitchen, tossing my keys onto the laminate counter. I opened the fridge and grabbed a bottle of water. As I closed the door, my eyes fell on the small stack of mail resting near the microwave. I rarely got mail that wasn't a utility bill or a grocery circular. The envelope on top was thick, made of heavy, expensive cream paper, the kind of paper you use for wedding invitations or formal announcements. I picked it up. My thumb brushed over the return address, printed cleanly in the top left corner. It was a university address, a dormitory in another state. My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. I just stood there in the quiet kitchen, listening to the low, mechanical hum of the refrigerator compressor kicking on. It had taken him 5 months to figure out I wasn't playing the game anymore. I imagined the sequence of events, the blocked texts, the unreturned voicemails from alternate numbers, the slow, creeping realization that the ghost he had tried to keep in the attic had simply packed up and moved out. I imagined the conversations he must have had with Taylor. Why isn't Dad answering? He usually caves by now. And now, this. A letter. A physical, undeniable piece of reality, demanding to be acknowledged. I ran my index finger under the sealed flap of the envelope. I didn't open it. I could guess the contents. It would be a mixture of defensive justification and cautious olive branches. He would say I overreacted. He would say I misunderstood the speech. He would say he still loved me, but I needed to understand his relationship with Martin. He would ask for money for textbooks. He would offer a brief, scheduled phone call as a reward for my compliance. It would be a negotiation, but I had nothing left to negotiate with. I had spent 15 years trading my dignity, my finances, and my emotional stability for scraps of his time. I had played the desperate, trailing underdog for so long that I forgot what it felt like to stand up straight. I held the envelope up to the overhead light. It was completely opaque. Whatever words were written inside, whatever apologies or demands or justifications he had chosen to put to paper, they belonged to a reality I no longer inhabited. He had chosen his father. He had announced it to a room of 2,000 people. He didn't get to have a backup plan. He didn't get to keep me on a shelf, dusting me off only when his conscience pricked him or his bank account dipped. I walked over to the stainless steel trash can at the end of the counter. I stepped on the foot pedal. The lid popped open, revealing coffee grounds, empty soup cans, and crumpled paper towels. I didn't tear the letter. I didn't burn it in a dramatic burst of cinematic revenge. I simply let go of it. The heavy cream envelope dropped into the garbage, landing softly against a damp coffee filter. I took my foot off the pedal. The metal lid snapped shut with a hollow, definitive clank. I walked out of the kitchen, turned off the hallway light, and went into the gray room to wrap my hands for the heavy bag. I had work in the morning. Sometimes, the only way to win a rigged game is to simply walk off the board. Leaving wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of quiet survival. I built a steady life out of the wreckage, and for the first time in 15 years, I can finally breathe. If this story resonated with your own silent battles, please hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and stay strong.